Welcome to the Drum Shuffle, a podcast offering insights, perspectives, and conversations for drummers. I'm your host, Jamie Eads. How's it going out there, everybody? Welcome to the Drum Shuffle. Jamie Eads joining you as always. This is episode 57. Hope everybody's having a fantastic week out there. We have a great interview for you today. I am going to be joined by my friend and one of the great publicists and public relations professionals out there. He's just worked with tons of great drummers and just a consummate professional. Chris DiGirolamo will be joining me right after this message from Cabos Drumsticks. The best kept secret for drummers is finally out. Cabos Drumsticks may look like the sticks you grew up with, but these are not your father's drumsticks. Cabos Drumsticks is Canada's #1 drumstick brand, and they are coming to a retailer near you. With operations in over 28 countries worldwide, thousands of drummers have already discovered the Cabos difference. Using FSC certified wood from Canada and the US, Cabos make the finest quality drumsticks, percussion tools, and accessories on the market. The best news, Cabos Drumsticks offers you a ton of choice. They have 22 individual drumstick models and 14 percussion tools, many of which are available in 3 different wood types: maple, white hickory, and red hickory. Red hickory comes from the center or heart of the hickory tree and has been independently proven to be both stronger and more elastic than white hickory without adding a lot of weight. While most drumstick manufacturers have shunned red hickory, Cabos Drumsticks has embraced it, becoming the only established stick brand in the world to offer a full line of red hickory drumsticks. To learn more about Cabos Drumsticks, visit them online at loscabosdrumsticks.com. Follow them on Facebook, Twitter, or Instagram, and don't forget to ask for Cabos Drumsticks at your favorite retailer. Dare to be different. Join the Red Hickory Revolution with Cabos Drumsticks. All right, everybody. As I mentioned, I'm about to be joined by my pal, Chris DiGirolamo of Two for the Show Media. Chris is a drummer. He has been working with just all sorts of drummers over the past 13 years at Two for the Show Media. Chris does public relations and publicity for a lot of artists, and Chris and I have worked together quite a bit on this very program. A lot of the guests that we get here on the Drum Shuffle are clients of Chris, and we've worked together for over a year now. And it was just really my pleasure to have him on the show to talk a little bit about working with some of these artists and what it means to be in the publicity and public relations business. Just a consummate professional, and proud to call him my friend. Help me welcome Chris DiGirolamo. Good afternoon, Chris. How's it going?
It's going good, Jamie. How are you?
Man, I'm doing well. It's a little bit cold here in the Bluegrass State, and I know you guys are suffering through some cold weather up in the big city as well.
I don't want to talk about it.
Well, we jokingly said before we started recording here, it happens every year.
Yes, it is winter.
It is winter, so that's for sure. Well, Chris, thanks so much for taking some time to come on the Drum Shuffle and talk a little bit with us. We really do appreciate your time.
Oh, sure. My pleasure.
So, I think what I would like to do is to kind of go back to the very beginning. We do that a lot here on the Drum Shuffle. Obviously, we're going to talk a lot about what you do these days in running Two for the Show Media. But you are a drummer. You grew up in Queens and you've played drums for a very long time. Kind of walk us through getting behind a drum set for the first time and all that good stuff.
Well, it's funny. My daughters just asked me that last night, and we were talking about it. And I have to tell you, there really was always this kind of point where I just thought the drums were cool. It doesn't really get much deeper than that on a side part. Like, I just thought to myself, the drums are cool. I want to try this. And And when I was younger, I don't want to sound like the poor man, but we didn't, my mom was a single mom, and we didn't really have the ability to go out and buy a kit. So what we would do is she would go, every birthday, Christmas, however the event was for a gift, she would get me one more part of the drum set. So, my first drum was a snare drum, and then my second was a hi-hat, and then we would take it from there, and eventually we built it up. But before that, my mom's boyfriend at the time, who's now my stepfather, he used to own a fruit and vegetable stand, and he would bring home boxes every night for me, and I would set the boxes up like a drum set.
Of course.
And that's how I played. I mean, it sounds like so third world, but I literally would sit behind a kit that was made up of boxes. And that's how I started playing. And I played, we also lived in an apartment building, and I literally played my drums in an apartment building for, a good 6-7 years without complaint. I don't know how it happened, but we did. And I used to play to just some of the worst music you could ever imagine. I remember Leo Sayers' "You Make Me Feel Like Dancing" was like one of my, and I would just play it over and over and over. And now I can't even hear the song, without getting sick. But and then I remember I did a lot of Steve Miller and, stuff that you were able to kind of play on the 2 and 4 and feel like you were playing.
Yeah.
Because it's very, if you're playing an instrument and you don't feel like you're playing or part of it, it's very discouraging. But and it just really built from there. I just, some of us, as in the drum world, we just, once you get in and you get it, it's just there for you. It's with you for life. It really is. That's how it started, and we just, built the kit up. And I have to tell you something that's really funny. I did not buy my first full brand new drum set until I think I was 22.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I literally I was playing on Pearl. I had Pearl drums, but they were, the bass drum was I'll never forget it. It was called U.S. Mercury. It was a Japanese company.
Oh yeah, one
and
of those stencil kits.
I think I had that bass drum for it. Don't owe me a dime, But that's how it kind of got started. It was just really kind of a cool event, and I always loved it. And and like I said, it's something that it's just with you.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And you jokingly said it sounds third world. I mean, that was my story as well. It was like, okay, I want another crash cymbal. Well, wait till your birthday.
Right.
I mean, it's just, and I think everybody's story is unique in that, but the fact that we all chose the instrument and stuck it out, I think that's what's so rewarding amongst drummers.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. I mean, clearly with business now, and it's almost like I've taken the other side of it for drummers. But it's and I now have a drum room in my house, with an electric kit and a regular Yamaha kit, and then I have a kit that's piled up in the corner, which 25 years ago I would have said you were crazy.
Yeah.
So it just never goes away. It really doesn't.
Yeah, it doesn't. And I think that's what's so cool amongst all of us. I have a cardinal rule at my house. Drums only go one direction, and that's in the house. I never get rid of any of the old stuff,
Oh, I know.
And, I've told some of my friends, if I ever die, make sure you tell my wife what this stuff is really worth, because, it's worth more than I told her I paid for it all the time, So that's the running joke amongst me and my drummer buddies. Well, obviously you stuck with it because you went to Berklee in Boston, correct?
Yes.
So I'm assuming, you represent a whole lot of jazz artists. So I'm assuming that jazz was a pretty big part of your upbringing on the instrument. And obviously you're a fan of jazz music. Did you, do kind of school orchestra and jazz band and those things growing up?
I did. I have to tell you, I was never a big fan of all that, believe it or not. I was very much into my own study, and I had some great, great teachers. I studied with Frank Marino, who in New York I was a tremendous Bill Bruford fan when I was in my teens. And Frank wrote a book called Time Capsule, which is a whole book on odd time signatures, so I was completely embedded in that and just really kind of own study. I did partake in the jazz band in high school, and the teacher was, just a tyrant. And I just, he really kind of took the fun out of it, and I just didn't really get that into it. It was tough to be excited about it when the environment was not really great. And then I did go to Berklee, and when I went to Berklee, it was so exciting to be able to get accepted, and it was very different then. Now you have to audition for it. You didn't have to audition back then. It was basically, if they took you, you then went in and probably the application was, numbers were probably a little less, and that's why. But if they took you, what you would do is you'd go in and you'd place. In other words, you would sit in a room with a drum set against the wall, and you'd have like four of the best drummers on their faculty, like hovering over your shoulder and saying, do this and do that, and then they would kind of, they would tell you where you needed to start and based upon your performance. But the jazz side of it has always, like I said this to someone recently, my mom was a big part of that. She used to take me to see just incredible music, that at the time you're not really hip to it because you're young. She just took Ella Fitzgerald, Joe Pass, Buddy Rich. I mean, everybody. I remember one night she called me up and I was home and she said, "I'm coming home from work and we're going out." And I said, "Well, where are we going?" And she said, "I can't tell you." And we went to see Frank Sinatra at Carnegie Hall with Buddy Rich Big Band opening up for them. It was just, and I was 13.
Wow.
That kind of thing. It was just to have that experience. And then when I went to Berklee, even though I was into jazz, and I was, and still am, a huge Deadhead. So, I mean, it wasn't just jazz. I could, went to 200 or so Grateful Dead shows as well. But when I went to Berklee, I remember it was really a difference. You think the music, and then I took a history of jazz class. And the history of jazz class was in the auditorium with, like 300 people, and the lecturer would be, up on the stage. And I learned more in that class than you could ever imagine. And that's really what kind of took me over the edge with it. And, the greatest thing about that music is every day, even with what I do, every day I learn something new where I can say, like, "Oh, I didn't know about that record," or, "I didn't know that drummer played with that particular person," or it just always grows, So
Yeah.
it started really, in reference to the question, it started with Mom. It really did. I mean, there was just always music playing in the house, like Joe Cuba and all these things that were, you just weren't, kids were not going home and listening to that too much. And she had a unique interest. And, and my father is, still listening to House of the Rising Sun, that kind of thing. So it didn't get too deep there. But even from that, I learned from him, it's just the picture really went across the board. But I would say really Berklee and the classes got me, into really studying Art Blakey and Philly Joe. And, I was a Blakey fanatic, and still am. But at that time, I just embraced what he did on every recording.
Yeah, for sure. Well, so after Berklee, I mean, I'm kind of curious. I know that you kind of played around the city and did things, but at what point did you decide to get into the publicity side of things? Because, if you're into all these guys, all these influences that you've named, you're working with a lot of them now. I mean, which is just, that's got to be the most fulfilling job in the world.
I have to tell you, it's a bit bizarre. I've gotten used to it. But one of the stepping stones that I had out of Berklee was I came home from Berklee after a year, and my father called me up one day and he said, "Do you remember such and such family, the friend, one of these Italian fifth cousin things?" And he said, "He has a recording studio in Brooklyn, and they're looking for somebody." And I was taking some recording classes up at Berklee, and I went to see him. And I took the job, and really my whole life changed with that, because not only when you say you had a chance to work with them now, and it must be surreal, when I was 19, I took this job, and the job was really a trip, because at the time, the studio was doing, and I kid you not, Hasidic music, and bad rock music, like that's how it was just, but they were booked around the clock, but, because they were in Brooklyn, New York, there was a tremendous Hasidic community close by, and they had a big record industry. So one day I was in there, and I walked in, and Steve Coleman was doing a record there with Marvin Smitty Smith on drums, and Cassandra Wilson was singing, and it was just, when all these people were really young. And I said to the owner, I said, Joe, do you realize what's going on here? Like, these guys are, the up and coming of jazz, and he had no idea. And needless to say, the entire place turned into one of the biggest jazz recording studios at this point, I'd have to say, in the history of the music in New York, because, as a matter of fact, they just closed. They retired. But I got to work with Dennis Chambers and Smitty and all these people, man. It was just incredible. And I got to, and that doesn't just include drums, it was the sax players and Dave Holland, and it went on and on and on. Every day was like a dream. It really was. Everybody would be complaining about going to work, and I'd go to work and work with these people, and I'd be like, man, and I'm 20 and I'm getting paid, and it was crazy. But my point is that after doing some teaching in between, music teaching and different things like that, when I started doing Two for the Show Media, I knew a lot of these people from that experience.
Yeah.
So I would go to them and say, do you remember me? And we would, and a lot of them have picked up like that. So it's, I will say, they all put their pants on the same way. They're all, and most of them are really fantastic people for the schedules they have and for everything that they go through. They're really appreciative, and it's been, it really has been a dream. I scratched the surface on it, and then it really opened up, and I got to tell you, I never seeked it. I never went out and said, we want to work with all these famous drummers. It just kind of one led to the other, and they told two friends, and so on, and so on, and here it is.
Well, I mean, that's the best way, I think, to build any business is through word of mouth. And, I know you wouldn't say so otherwise, so I'm going to give Two for the Show Media a giant plug. I've been working with you since the very beginning of this show. We've had a lot of your guys and girls on the show that you represent, and your organization is just top notch. So thank you so much for always, thinking of us as an outlet when somebody has a new record, et cetera, and I jokingly say all the time, if you put a gun to my head a year ago today and said, you're going to have Peter Erskine on your show, I would have said you're nuts, and you made that happen for me. So thank you.
Oh, no, my pleasure. And I'll tell you, I would have said the same thing, 13 years ago.
Right.
So it's all, and it's really just hard work, man, and persistence. And what I've found is to do what a lot of people tell you not to do. And I don't mean that to do something illegal. I mean, when I started this out, people would say, you got to get out and meet these people, and that's the only way you're going to get them. And I would email everybody, and they would get back to me. You know what I mean? And we would start a conversation, and once they heard me and we talked and discussed what the plan was, it all worked out. But, look, you guys your show's been a huge plus. And the greatest thing about the Drum Shuffle is, when I was younger, and this, people would do drum clinics, and you'd, have to go to the clinic. And with you, it's like you can go to your show, and it's like an archive of just drum clinics. The playing you can't do, but still the knowledge of all these drummers is phenomenal. Right.
Well, and, that has always been the aim of this show is, sure, I love to talk about paradiddles and radamuqueus as much as the next guy, but that's kind of boring to listen to, I mean, I've never asked the question, gosh, what did you do in the 30-second measure of that song? You know what I mean?
Know, right?
I mean, because that's what YouTube is for, I mean, you can find tutorials on all these different pieces of music anywhere. I want to know what makes you tick as a human being, as a musician. And I think that's what comes across so well in podcast form. That's just my opinion. I may be completely off the mark, but I mean, that's kind of what I went for. And, my listeners know, and I've said this a billion times on this show, I thought about it from my 13-year-old self when I first got into drumming. What would the 13-year-old Jamie want to know from all these great drummers?
Yep.
How did you grow up? How did you get into drumming? Did you have formal education, all those things? That's that's what I'm trying to get out there into the universe. And, it's working thanks to great partners like yourself. So I'll transition just a little bit here. Two for the Show Media has been around for a while, and it would take the rest of our hour to list everybody you've worked with. I mean, it's just an amazing list of artists that you have worked with over the years. But talk to us about forming Two for the Show Media, and do you have that one seminal moment where you knew it was going to work?
Well, the story is, I will tell you that this entire 13 years it'll be on Valentine's Day, this entire journey was by mistake.
Great mistake.
Completely by mistake. When I used to do a lot of drum columns, there was a paper in New York called the Music Paper, and I used to do it. Matter of fact, my drum teacher, Frank Marino, who I was telling you about, had to stop doing his drum column, and he gave it to me. And it was a combination of interviews and patterns every week and different things. And then I started branching out and doing some stuff for Modern Drummer. Nothing on a feature side. I would do a lot of the, smaller pieces. And so I always kept up with just writing. And at the time, I went from the recording studio in Brooklyn to the record plant in Sausalito, where they've done just an incredible amount of, legendary rock records.
Yeah.
And when I was there, it was a new owner, and it just, they were not making payroll. So it was just not a good thing. I was there on my own. It was just not a great thing. So I came home, and this was when I was at this period, I was looking for some different kind of work, not out of music, but something different. And this was post 9/11, so work was tough. There was not much out there, and I was doing the freelance writing gig, and it just wasn't, cutting it. And somebody recommended me as a publicist, and it was a mistake. I was a writer. So I was home one day, and my cell phone rang, and this guy came on the phone, and he said to me, "Hi, is this Chris?" I said, "Yeah." And he said, "You come recommended to me. I have a new record out as a publicist." And I don't know why, but I just paused, and I went, "Yeah." And then he said, "Well, great. What's the setup?" And so I said, "Look, why don't we meet?" And we met in the city on Valentine's Day in 2006, and we met in front of Madison Square Garden, and it was the day of the Westminster Dog Show, so there were like dogs everywhere. And we were in this Jeep in front of the garden, and he wrote me my first check, to do work for Publicity, which was completely by mistake. And this is a true story. And I came home, and I got off the train, and I went right to Barnes & Noble, and I bought a dummies book, Publicity for Dummies. And I had no clue. I knew because I had been pitched as a writer for my column. So I knew, the basis of it, but that's how it started. And I've worked with Peter Erskine for probably 11 of those 13 years. And I remember the first time, there were two people that we picked up that I started to say, this is working, was John Abercrombie and Peter Erskine. And I just started to see how it was all filtering out, and then it just became one thing after the next. And like I said, there's a tremendous amount of drummers, but there's also a tremendous amount of guitar players and saxophone players and piano players and vocalists. But that's how it happened. It was bizarre, and that moment where it occurred, and also I had no name for the company, and the singer had called me up and they said, "What's the name of your company?"
Yeah, right.
And I don't know why, but I just remember that when I used to go and get press tickets, it was two. It was your Chris DiGirolamo plus one.
Right.
So I went two for the show, and now I'm stuck with it.
Well, it's working for you.
The entire thing was really kind of a sequence of events that you can't make up. And what's funny is to this day, I still don't know who recommended me. Well,
and I believe in serendipity. I'm not an overtly religious guy by any stretch of the imagination, but sometimes I think things just happen in the universe for a reason, and maybe that's yours.
It was strange, and I didn't realize the value of it until now. When you realize that you've been doing it for this long and consistently, which is incredible.
Absolutely. Well, I think having a writing background, you were doing writing for so many years, but, a big part of your job is, crafting press releases for artists, and there is a certain art form in that. It's different than writing a column, certainly, and I'll be the first to tell you, I am not a journalist. I'm just a drummer talking to other drummers on this show. I know literally next to nothing about journalism. But if you come from, a writing background, you learn how to write those press releases. Your job is basically to get all the attention that you possibly can for those you represent, correct?
That's the basis of it, yeah. And every artist has a different need. So it's never just the same, as someone said to me recently, it's never just the same special sauce to make it happen. It's completely different. Somebody who's coming up and has a great recording, and if they are a young drummer, they need a special attention, whereas Peter Erskine is a totally different approach.
Right.
So it just depends on the artist.
Yeah, for sure. Well, one of the questions that I have asked you, about our show here is, at what point does someone need a publicist? At what point does a drummer, a sax player, whatever the case may be, at what point does an artist need to engage a publicist?
Well, I don't want to sound self-serving, but...
Oh, come on, give us your pitch, man.
No, but let me tell you, when we started, another reason why things took off was, there is timing, serendipity, but there is timing. And the timing of it was that a tremendous amount of record labels were just falling and going out of business. And it was the end of the world. Everybody was,
Right.
It really was. It was I remember it, how are we going to do it? It was completely the end of the world. And what had happened was, it wasn't the end of the world. It was a change that provided all of the artists in the world who wanted to play an instrument and could, put together a recording. Some fantastic, some very good, some never mind. But it gave everybody the ability to now be their own boss in recording it. They can record it. They can put it up digitally. They could have it at Amazon. They could, it just, gave that big forum. So what happened was, we became one of the few people that was there for hundreds and hundreds of artists. Whereas in the past, it used to be, 10 major labels and they had a PR department.
Right.
So it just opened up completely. So when I say not to be self-serving, I say that if you are new, and this is something that I say all the time, everybody was new. You know what I mean? There is not a drummer we know. There's not another instrumentalist that we know that was not new and no one knew about. So you have to take that approach. And when I say, self-serving in the sense of going to say right away, the reason I preview stuff, now people can say, well, do you just call Chris and, he says, yeah, let's do it. No, there's a process. If somebody calls me and says, I want to send you something, I'm interested in doing this, and I listen to it, I can tell if it's something that's going to connect with the media based upon the massive amount of music they have. If I say, yeah, and it's not going to do it, I'm not being honest with them. So that's why I preview everything and say, you know what, this guy's new. He might have something behind his story. Sometimes they don't. But is it something that the media is going to, bite into? And at this point, with my name and with the company's name, they know, okay, if I get this from Two for the Show Media, I may not like it, but I know it's a solid recording, So
Yeah.
In answer to the question, I really say if you have something solid and you want to start building your profile as a musician right away, there's no reason to not. And if you came here, I would tell you if you're ready or you're not. It's not something that just, for me, somebody else may say, I want to take this on. But for me, I want to make sure that it's something that if you're going to make a big investment in, that we at least have a chance to give you everything you want. And some people will just take things, okay, you want a PR person, here it is, this is what it costs. Did you even hear the record yet? No, I didn't, but So
right.
you just have to be honest. But I say right away, if you want to start building your profile towards, increasing everything.
Well, and not to pick on anybody, but, one of the guys that you represent that hadn't crossed my path, it just wasn't on my radar, was the great Daphnis Prado, right? Mm-hmm. And I had Daphnis on the show. I listened to his record and I was blown away, but it just wasn't on my radar because I'm not in that circle, right? And he's up for a Grammy. He is a Grammy nominee this year. And
yeah, he had a Latin Grammy nomination too.
Yeah. I mean, it's just incredible, but so that goes to show you that publicity does matter. I mean, because I would have never discovered Daphnis on my own, probably, you know what I mean? So,
yeah.
So that was a great example. Now you talk about, kind of previewing artist stuff. I know that, in my own experience, at this point in my career, I'm doing a lot of bar gigs kind of thing, and there's a ton of bands that will rehearse up, 15 songs and they'll go to a club owner and they'll say, look, we'll play for $50. Well, they don't want to pay an old guy like me, $700, right? So do you have some of that same stuff in the publicity market where people are just like, hey, I know how to use Twitter and Instagram and Facebook. I'm going to be a publicist and basically give it away?
Oh, Lord. You had to ask me that question.
Well, yeah, I told you I'm not a journalist. I don't know what I'm doing.
I say this with the utmost respect towards the certain arenas of business layout that people do. But today people feel like, well, I have Facebook, I have Twitter, I can do this. And it's like, you know what? Go for it, and let me see how it works out for you. Because, and I don't mean that sarcastically, I just mean it almost out of frustration because, I always say, if my Aunt Matilda can have a Facebook page, it doesn't really give you much value above that. You want something that's going to represent you in a way that shows that you're serious and special and have a marketing plan behind what you're doing. That being said, don't get me wrong. The social media side in today's society is we must use it because it's just so simple. And if I put something on the Two for the Show Media Facebook page, it goes to almost 6,000 people in a second. So of course you want to use that, but the premise, a lot of the premise of what's happening with some people that are new and they feel that that's the only that I can do this through that is really kind of off base, and I respect everybody's approach towards what they want to do. Who am I to say? But the only thing I ever share, Jamie, is my experience.
Right.
It's not like the world according to me. I just say, I've seen this and it doesn't work. It doesn't give you the level of what you want to do. There was recently a convention of some sort here in New York, which I was unable to attend. And at the convention that promotes, I'm trying not to mention any names, promotes business aspects of what we do in the jazz field, they had a contest at this event that it was how to do a tour and marketing campaign of your CD for $1,000.
Oh, well, yeah, okay.
And I thought to myself, now I'm going to go from that to the panel that talks about what's needed to make a record and marketing. It really was a conflict of what it is. And if you can do it for $1,000, God bless you, but it's really, listen, I say this just because I've developed the reputation, but if somebody comes to me and we work this out, we have a marketing plan, and we send this to the media at NPR and the magazines that, whether it be Modern Drum or Drum, whatever it be, they know, okay, this person has representation. You know what I mean?
Right.
And if they have representation, they're pretty serious about what they're trying to do.
Right.
That's all. It's not to say someone is doing it. But look, if you want to buy a car for $1,000, you're probably not going to get that many miles out of it.
Yeah, that's a great analogy and a great point, and I ask that because, I just know that there's, in our field, when you're, talking about artists, the creative types, whether it's a musician, a painter, a writer, it doesn't matter. It's very competitive. All of it is. And, you want to get the right team around your project or your band or you as a solo artist. So I ask the question just simply to illustrate that it happens to all of us. It happens to bands. This baby band will come in and say, hey, I can play your corporate event for, $200, whereas, another band that's been around for 20 years wants $1,500.
Yep.
If you don't really understand what you're buying, you know what I'm saying? So that's kind of where I was leading with that.
And not to interrupt you, Jamie, but the scariest and hardest part about it is in publicity, there's no guarantee.
Oh, absolutely not.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So that's almost like saying I can buy the better car, but it may not run, So,
right.
It's tough. But I mean, look, I always say this to everybody, and my colleagues follow suit. They're all wonderful people. But I wouldn't be here for 13 years if the car didn't run.
Right. Well, and, I'm smart enough to know not to come to you and say, hey, man, I want to be on the cover of Modern Drummer. I mean, I know that that's probably not going to happen, but I'm sure you get asked the question a lot, especially being, fairly jazz centric. I would guess that most people that just call you up out of the blue say, hey, can you get me into downbeat? Right. I mean, is that?
Well, that's a popular question. One of the best stories, and it's a short one, just recently happened this past summer. I received a phone call from someone who's a bass player. I have to tell you, I don't remember his name. And he called me and said to me, I need to talk to you. We have a project. So I called him back, and he said to me, I'm going to send you some videos of the project first. Okay. Well, the videos were of his band at a barbecue.
Okay.
And he called me back and he said to me, listen, we got to talk about this. I said, well, go ahead. Let me hear you first. And he said, we need to be on Saturday Night Live.
Yeah,
now,
you do.
I thought for a second, is this someone I know that's not, and he was dead serious. And I said, listen, I'm just going to tell you as an honest, person in what I do, that'll never happen. Okay? It'll never happen with what you're doing right now, And he said, all right, if you really feel that way, he said, well, what do you think about getting on Jimmy Fallon? So, I could write a book.
Maybe you should.
Maybe I should.
I mean, I just, look, I'm not trying to pick on anybody, but I know people that are like that as well. They're convinced that the next song they record in their bedroom is going to be, the next Let It Be or whatever the case may be. And I just always, and if you feel that strongly about your craft, by all means, chase it, hone it, do your thing.
Those things didn't happen in our musical lifetime without people feeling like that.
Exactly. But you cannot, there's a saying down here in the South, and you may have heard it, don't worry about the mule, just load the wagon.
Yep.
And everybody in music worries about the mule instead of worrying about, is this song any good? And, am I recording it on, a 35-year-old boombox, or am I using real microphones? You know what I mean? It's just, I think there's such a disconnect from the passion behind the music to how it's really going to be received. And I'm probably as guilty of that as anybody else. So I guess you are one of those gatekeepers that say to folks, look, I know you want to be on the cover of Modern Drummer. You're not ready for that. So I guess in a way you wear a hat sort of like a life coach as well, yes?
Well, I always say there's part therapy in what we do here. That's definitely the case. But you'd be surprised, Jamie. I mean, most people are pretty realistic. You know what I mean? It's I would say it's almost 95-5. It's the 5 that you get that are the stories become like that, and it is what it is. But most people are very realistic. They know their place, they know what it is, and we've even had veteran players come in and say, we know our place and we know what's going on right now. And you have to remember, like Rich Redmond, who we were talking about. Rich was just on the cover of Modern Drummer, and playing with Jason Aldean, you're in a position where, as an editor, you may be sitting down and saying, what market do we want to corner with this issue? You know what? The country field is so huge in the United States. Let's try to get, one of the best and get him out there and interview him and see what it is. Now, if I come to the plate and I say, I'm working with such and such, and they really do have a right to be there, it's just not on their radar for their business plan at that time. So that's a big part of it, and people can go, I can't believe they won't cover this. And listen, I say it too. I can't believe they won't cover certain things. But you got to remember that we have a meeting with the artist, and then we talk to the editor, and then there's a meeting at their office too.
Right.
And that meeting they are not starting it off with, well, what does Chris DiGirolamo want? They may say this is what came to us, which they usually do, but they're trying to, they have a product too.
Yeah. Yeah. But I mean, it's a good point. And, I've complained in your ear about other publicists that I've worked with, that I've reached out to and said, hey, I want to have your artist on the Drum Shuffle. And, we're just over a year old. We're kind of, the new kid on the block. And I understand, when I ask for an artist to come on this show, it's, 45 to 60 minutes of their time. You can do, 10 radio spots in 60 minutes, right? Right? I mean, so I get it. I'm fighting for that time, but it's, well, email me next month. And so I do. And well, email me next month. So I do. And it's just this never ending cycle. So I understand everybody has a pecking order, but if you don't want to do it, just say, you know what, we're going to pass, reach back out to us in a year, and tell us what you're up to. So how much of that do you fight on a daily basis?
Oh, it's I will say, they're very respectful to things, but basically in PR, you'll either get no answer or you'll get a no, and then in certain cases, they jump right on it. It depends on what it is. But you have to remember, somebody said this to me once at a workshop I did about 10 years ago. They said, well, do you approach every writer the same way? And I said, how could you? If I go to Modern Drummer and I approach Adam and say, we want to do this for the educational column, we would be perfect. And I go to Drumhead magazine and I say, this guy would be great for a feature, you've never had him, and I know it fits right into your wheelhouse. And then I go to Drum magazine and I say, this guy has been covered in there, but we want to get his CD covered. So everybody has a different, you never approach everything the same way. It's, it always has a different, spin on it. But listen, the one thing that I talked about earlier where I said, the independent market has increased and they're all in the pool now. Well, guess who's in the pool with them? Their personalities. So you have so many I always say, there's a joke here we say in the office where I say, you could send Love Supreme to certain writers and they'll tell you that the saxophone's too loud. It's just, it is what it is. But when you deal with the amount of personalities we deal with, Jamie, by all means, you're going to get that.
Sure. Well, and, my approach has always been, and I'm guessing your approach is very similar. The answer is always no if you don't ask the question. I've gotten emails from listeners saying, why don't you have Ringo Starr on the show? And, the answer is because nobody is going to let me anywhere near Sir Ringo, right?
Yeah.
But you still send the email to his publicist.
Of course, yeah.
Because if you don't ask, the answer is always no. So, I guess you get a lot of no's in your life as well. That's my point.
You know what? The no's have become more of a quiet. It's not
right.
If you pitch a couple of people and you really give them a good pitch and you don't get a response, you got to remember they could be busy that day and then it slips their mind. So you stay on them until that. But we know these people so well at this point that we know how their personalities, and we know how they act towards certain things, and we know what they like and what they don't like. I have one writer, all he likes is big band music. Like Daphnis's record is a big band record, and don't send him a trio.
Right.
Don't. So it just it depends on all the writers. It really does. And like I said, I'm not kidding. You are dealing with more personalities than you could imagine.
Oh no, I can't imagine. The listeners may not imagine, but
No, and Jamie, not to interrupt you, but you got to remember. I always say this. I say this with everything in my life. I really do. What's the worst thing? To go to a place where we say, God, this person, like a Ringo Starr, like a Charlie Watts, whatever it is, somebody who's just such a legend of the musical field. What's the worst thing? They say no, they don't answer. But if they say yes.
Yeah, that's exactly right.
Yeah.
And I've been, the beneficiary of that, just saying, hey, I would love to have you on the show. And, I've been surprised, with a couple of them. Sure. Yeah. Why not?
It was very different 20 years ago. We're blessed with the technology as drummers, as musicians, as, workers in the musical field to be able to contact so many people in a single day. Think about it. My job 25 years ago was a lot of phone calls.
Oh yeah, I'm sure your phone bill rivaled that of NASA or something.
Yeah, no, it's different because of it. Because of technology now. Because there are writers that say, "Look, this is the quickest way to get me. I don't want to talk on the phone." So it rivals it. But yeah, it's like I said though. You just got to keep in mind it's a personality thing, and you're not doing any damage to anything by asking. In a form that maybe we all feel like, do I belong here? Half of what I've developed was taking a chance on asking in a field or a forum that I felt I didn't belong in, and it worked.
Yeah, well, and I hope you don't mind me sharing, but I do want to tell everybody how you and I kind of cross paths because I think it's a great story. When I first started the Drum Shuffle, I was literally going through my Facebook friends list, who's in the industry that I could get on the show. And, I had been following Aaron Comes for years and years. Mm-hmm. And I sent him a Facebook instant message and said, hey man, I started up this drum podcast. I'd love to have you on, not knowing that he worked with you, did the interview. It, went out and you caught wind of it and you reached out to me and said, hey, great job. I'd love to figure out a way for us to work together. And, that's kind of how that happened. So I got super lucky twice on that interview. You know what I'm saying? So it's just good stuff. Now,
and you know what? I will tell you, there are people, and I'm not saying this because you're with me here today. There are people that I can prep a pitch and you go, all right, this is going to be what it's going to be.
Yeah.
And when I speak with you, and there are others, but when I speak with you, it's the joy of the drumming community and how can we make this work? And as I always say, I won't be afraid to ask if you won't be afraid to tell me no and why. It's,
right.
It's not a big deal, but it's always a pleasure. And that's what makes it fun. If you go through this, it's like any job. You know what I mean? We could be working in an office shuffling papers, but if we work next to each other with 5 other guys or girls that are just a lot of fun and we get the work done, you don't mind going to work.
That's right.
And that's really what it is when you deal with this stuff. And it does trickle down, it really does. So many things, a lot of things have come through Aaron, where because Aaron is not jazz. It's Aaron and I actually we were at Berklee at the same time, and we never knew it.
Oh, really? Now that's a cool story.
Yeah, we never knew.
Well, he's just a monster. And he can play any style,
Yep.
whether it's jazz, rock, funk. He's just a monster player. So, I like I said, I got lucky twice on that one. But one other thing that I do want to touch on, and I'm not going to ask you to give any work product away for free. So please make this generic, but you've mentioned a couple of different times coming up with a marketing plan. give us some idea, for those of us that are still do-it-yourselfers, if I really want to promote my record out there, what is a typical marketing plan? What does it look like?
Well, if you're working with us?
Yeah. So tell me, just kind of a generic idea. Okay, I'm going to pitch here, I'm going to pitch here, and the order that you go in.
Again, it depends on the artist, but let's take Daphnis, okay? Daphnis comes to me as a MacArthur Grant winner, who's, it's an incredible thing to win because it gives you $1 million to go and work with the arts. You come to me, and it's almost like that thing in school where you put the circle on the board with the topic in it, and then you branch out the lines. It's exactly what it's like, where you say, okay, Daphnis Pareto, and you go, okay, what would it be? Well, he's a Latin bass player, so all the Latin publications. He's a drummer, all the drum publications. Well, what kind of music is it? It's jazz music. Okay, all the jazz publications. What about regional stuff? Well, he's from Cuba. And there are regional, papers, you're not getting into the Cuban press, but I mean, right. Try to angle that. What about his performances? Well, he has 20 dates this year and they're going to be within the next 6 months. Okay, get those performances set up too. So that's what you do with each artist. If you come into someone who's brand new, you may say, well, what's your story? My story is I studied at this particular school, and we can branch out from that. What do you play? Every publication that has to do with that. And I'll tell you something I do, just to step off the marketing plan for a second. If somebody comes to me with it could be a rock record. I mean, any record we would be talking about, and let's say it's drummer-led, and they have a guitar player, a bass player, and a keyboard player. Well, you better be going to Keyboard Magazine, bass publications, guitar publications, and drum publications, because, again, they could say no, but if they like the guitar player on it, they may pick it up and review it in a guitar magazine. You have to, it really is a branch out of the particular artist. You have to look at it in every, which way. And that's really, everybody has a different circle. The idea for a marketing plan with a new person, I always say, is the word is accumulate at that point. We want to accumulate as much as we possibly can for you to have a profile that did not exist. If you go to book a gig or you're trying to get some work, and I don't care if it's a jazz festival, a rock festival, whatever it is, if you come into someone and say, hey, I'm John Smith and I have a band, and the person says, well, I don't know who you are, and you give them a folder full of press recognition, they got to look at it. You know what I mean? It's right. Something that they immediately go, whoa, I may not have known about it, but everybody else does. If you go into the same place and say, you have nothing, you're going to get frustrated. And, I often say this when we talk about marketing with print marketing and radio marketing. People will come to me and say, I'm going to opt for radio marketing as opposed to print. And I'm like, okay, fine, and they may be in a position where they are trying to still get themselves, up and going. And I say, if you go into a booking agent or a club owner or whatever it be, and you say, I have a new record, and they say, okay, cool, and you go, yeah, it was on the radio for the last 3 months.
Yeah.
Okay, great. And then, but if you come in and you say, I have a new record, and here's all the press on it, give them something. You always want to give something that's tangible.
Sure.
And that's what, the marketing plan, like I said, if you always think about that circle and just branching off lines on every little, it's almost like, the think tank principle. It really is. And that's really how you want to go about it. I mean, for me, that's, like I said, I only talk about the way I approach it. And the one other thing I do to kind of close on that point is I say to every artist, okay, professionally, we'll go through this marketing setup. I know what to do, but what do you want? You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Make a list of 10 to whatever it be. I don't care if the list is 50 things. Whatever that list is, make a list of things that you would love to have. Because we may not get them. But boy, we want to make sure, like we said earlier, that we went there, and if the answer was no, the answer was no, but we did it.
Right. Absolutely. And that's what you're getting paid to do is, to make those things happen for the artist, right?
Yes, that's it.
Yeah. So, well, I mean, that's a ton of great knowledge right there, Chris. So thank you for sharing that, on our show, because that's, that's going to help a lot of our listeners, I think. I mean, it's just to kind of visualize the circle on the whiteboard and start branching off. That's something that we can all use in our day-to-day lives. Speaking of which, we have come to that time of the show, and as is the tradition, I get to put you on the spot now. I've put so many of your clients on the spot with this question. Give us a good piece of advice that you've learned over the years.
Oh, Lord. Well, you know what? Let me tell you the advice I gave myself, which I learned through seeing in error of others in the business. When I started doing this, I remember seeing that a lot of people were saying that they, the reason that the muck and mire of the business happened was because people were not honest. They told them one thing, they did another. Be honest. If you can't do a gig, be honest. If the gig is not for you, be honest. If you don't like the music, be honest. Just be honest. It's going to gain your respect, and it's always going to make the path easier. I always would say work hard, which seems like a no-brainer. But it's not.
Right.
You are not going to get anywhere if you do not work hard, and that's it's in the history of man. It's just not going to work. And then do what you say you're going to do. Keep to your word in the business. And if something does come into play where that word cannot be kept, well, then go back to be honest. And do it. So I say be honest, work hard, and keep your word. And you will always be there. I did when I had my column. I did an interview with a very well-known Latin drummer who I'd prefer not to mention his name because of the topic. But I said to him, "How are you so busy? How is it that you're just constantly going in a market that it is with there's so many drummers?" And he said, "You know what? I show up straight." He said, because so many people show up high. Right. And I thought, well, that really wasn't what I expected him to say, but so, straight and narrow in what I said, just like I said, people won't argue with your honesty, your hard work, and your word.
Yeah, for sure. Well, we mentioned him earlier. We just recently had Rich on the show, Rich Redmond. And, when I asked him for his piece of advice, he basically said what separates the men from the boys is execution. If you tell somebody you're going to do something, by golly, you do it.
Yeah.
And do it with integrity. And, I think we need more of that in our business, quite honestly. So great advice from you, Chris. Thank you so much for taking time and coming on the Drum Shuffle. I really do appreciate it. I look forward to working with you for many, many years to come. And we're going to have to make this kind of an annual thing to have you on the show and talk all about the world of publicity and give us more tips and tricks that we can all use as musicians. Does that sound like a deal?
Absolutely. As a matter of fact, I'll probably call you tomorrow with a couple of names.
Perfect. That's great. As a weekly show, we're always looking for somebody to feature. So it really is a great partnership that we've built, and I cherish it. And I thank you so much for taking time to come on the show and do this, man.
Anytime, you know that.
Absolutely. Chris, have a great evening. We will talk to you very, very soon, sir.
All right, Jamie. Thank you again.
All right. See you, man.
Bye-bye.
All right, guys and girls, that's going to wrap up episode 57 for the Drum Shuffle. I really do appreciate each and every one of you tuning in. We simply cannot do this show without every single one of you listening in week after week. To that end, hit the subscribe button, as always, on whatever platform you're using to listen in. We have some fantastic guests coming up over the next few weeks that you certainly don't want to miss. Next week, I'm going to be joined by the great Mark Poise. Mark is out on the road right now with Tyler Farr. Mark has worked with just a really cool list of artists, great Nashville guy who's just getting it done. So we're really excited to bring an interview with you to you with Mark next week. As always, we love hearing from you throughout the week. We love getting your emails. The Drum Shuffle Podcast at gmail.com is where you can email us. Our web address is thedrumshuffle.com, and you can find more information on me at jamieeads.com. Again, thank you so much for tuning in. We really do appreciate it. So until next time, may your head stay strong and your sticks never break. Cheers, everybody.